So many musicians over the years have been associated with magic and the occult. And I wonder sometimes how much of that is the popular perception of what they're creating versus things that are actually intrinsic to them. I think the very first instance that we have in America of that is Robert Johnston, the making the deal with the devil at the crossroads, becoming the great blues guitarist. But this association of demons, supernatural forces, Faustian bargains, all that stuff really predates the American musical experience and comes out of classical music and opera in Middle Europe and this long, long tradition going all the way back to ancient Greece about the intrinsic connection between music and the ethereal, the supernatural. The word muse itself, being tied to the Greek muses, the entities that bestow creativity upon mortals. So I wonder in maybe 20th century to 21st century music, popular music, how much of what we think of as being the dark arts and magic is popular folklore versus musicians that were genuinely interested and participated in the esoteric. What are some examples that you can think of?
Well, the first one that you said, Robert Johnson, interesting little fact about Robert is that legend of him selling his soul was actually about a guy named Tommy Johnson, who in his lifetime claimed that he sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads near the plantation where he grew up. And his Tommy Johnson's brother, they were writing a biography about him in the 70s, said that Tommy would go around saying that he actually sold his soul to the devil. And sometime between the early 70s and into the 80s, that legend got swapped to Robert Johnson. So, I mean, there's some subject matter in Robert Johnson's songs like Me and the Devil Blues that would lead one to believe that perhaps this guy did make some sort of Faustian pact with the devil. But those primary sources we have about Robert Johnson's life claim that he never claimed anything like that, or he's more of a womanizer, boozer type character. But not that I would go around telling everybody if I actually sold my soul to the devil. But the not American, but the earliest musician that you can find in history that people were certain sold his soul to the devil was Niccolo Paganini, the violinist in the early 1800s who played violin kind of the way Eddie Van Halen or Yngwie Malmsteen played guitar in the 70s and 80s. And people called him the devil's violinist. And there were all kinds of rumors about him that he had sold his soul to the devil to be able to play that fast. And it was really interesting that a lot of guitar shredders in the 80s took up his music, transposed it for guitar. But the two bands that are really mentioned when people talk about the occult are Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. And there's a little bit of truth to both. One, there's a little bit more reality behind it. And people naturally say, when you think of, who's a band who worships the devil, who's a band who is into the occult, people will say Black Sabbath. And the odd thing is they're surprisingly not occultish and not interested in black magic. They took the name Black Sabbath because the Mario Bava movie was showing at a theater near where they were playing a show. They were originally called Earth. And they thought that Black Sabbath would be a good name for a band. And Geezer Butler, the band's bass player, said people are paying money to see scary movies. Maybe they would pay money to hear scary music. Now, Geezer, Sabbath's bass player, was the person who wrote the majority of their lyrics in the early days. And he was kind of interested in the occult. Dennis Wheatley novels. He was the author who wrote The Devil Rides Out. They made a very famous movie out of that novel. And he mentioned that around the time they were writing the first album, he started dipping his nose into occult stuff, and he said one night he woke up and he saw a dark figure standing at the foot of his bed, and he completely disavowed anything. And if you listen to Black Sabbath's music, especially starting with the album Master of Reality, it's actually very anti-Satan and very, I mean, if you listen to the album, the Master of Reality is God, and they're singing about how if you better be careful because the devil's going to take you down to hell with him. There was never anything particularly, and I grew up in a Catholic family and was a Black Sabbath fan at a young age, and I was just perplexed at my grandmother saying, "Oh, this is horrible devil music you're listening to." And I was like, "Have you actually listened to this?" Because they're pretty much saying the same thing the priest is saying in church every Sunday. And that followed Black Sabbath on when Ozzy Osbourne left the band and became a solo artist in the 80s. People, Tipper Gore complaining about the song Suicide Solution, and he was always a member of the Church of England, Ozzy. The rest of the guys in Black Sabbath, no occult leaning there. They're very, it's showmanship. It's all showmanship.
Led Zeppelin.
But Led Zeppelin was a bit of a different story. So Led Zeppelin was the other band that if you hear about a Faustian pact that the band made, or Jimmy Page, their guitarist, made with the devil. And Page had a very, very, very deep interest in Aleister Crowley, to the extent that he bought Aleister Crowley's house. He collected a lot of Aleister Crowley's personal belongings. And if you look at the first pressing of the third Led Zeppelin album, in the runoff groove on side A, it says, "Do what thou wilt," which is the first line of a Crowley quote, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." And on side B, it said, "So mote it be," which is the way that you would end a black magic incantation. And I'll tell you, Led Zeppelin, and part of the mythology is that Robert Plant, the singer, John Bonham, the drummer, went along with the pact, and the bass player, John Paul Jones, didn't, and that was evidenced by the fact that he didn't travel with the band very much, he didn't socialize with the band very much, and Page almost died from heroin use, and Robert Plant lost his son. When his son was about 5 years old, he lost him from an illness. And John Bonham died from an alcohol overdose, choked on his vomit in his sleep. And they say that the ultimate curse brought on by this pact is that because John Bonham died, neither John Paul Jones nor Robert Plant ever wanted to resurrect Led Zeppelin. So Jimmy Page got his band taken away from him because of his deal with the devil, they say. I don't know if it's true, but that's an awful lot of tragedy to befall one band.
Well, going back to Robert Johnson and, this mythology that we live with of especially black musicians and a satanic influence. Obviously, we all recognize that, the United States has a checkered history with people of color and how we engage in them, and they have such an outsized presence in the media that we create that there's often like a cold front where people, have a disbelief about their popularity and abilities. And that reminded me of this connective tissue between the Robert Johnson myth and a couple of years ago, do you remember the Beyoncé Superbowl performance where people were losing their absolute minds, saying that she had done a satanic ritual to invoke evil powers during the Super Bowl when all the attention was on her and everybody who watched the Super Bowl was tainted and cursed by some kind of satanic magic. What are your thoughts on the connection between America, artists of color, and this sort of dark magic intersection, the Vesica Pisces of those Venn diagrams?
Well,
what's that say about us, man?
There's a certain element of, because there were rumblings about Jimi Hendrix in the late 60s. There were rumblings about Marvin Gaye being into black magic and doing weird sex cult things. That, I mean, yeah, he was a bit of a troubled person, but
Sammy
certainly
Davis
not.
Jr. and
Yeah,
was known to have participated, perhaps jokingly, but
yeah,
it is documented that he did participate in satanic church performances, rituals. We all know that the Anton LaVey of it all is more theatrical than devout, but still
yeah,
there is
yeah.
that association. That became a popular underground story.
Yeah, it's always kind of perplexed me, and I don't really have a I think it is rooted in some racism, definitely. That I think the white majority in the country has a problem with an extremely talented and successful black person. I think there are vestiges of that. I think it's rooted in just a lot of things. Just rock and roll music has always been very let, let, let's face it, rock and roll music is black music. And that's where it came from. Chuck Berry, Ike Turner. It's very rooted in black culture in America. And I think that it's always been seen as subversive. I mean, Stephen King was once talking about how AC/DC gets a lot of shit for being a satanic band, which they're not. And he always questioned the fact that I can write books about these scary, evil things, and people take it as entertainment and they take it as fiction. But if AC/DC gets up on stage and sings about this stuff, or if Ozzy Osbourne gets on this stage and thinks about this, people take it seriously and it's subversive. Or if Prince gets up there, who was an extremely religious person. I remember in the 80s, my grandmother telling my mom, that Prince guy is satanic and he's doing satanic rituals on stage. I think there's something about the power of rock and roll that is just very subversive in the minds of conservative people. Maybe because young people like it so much, and anything that young people are into, um, they want to keep clean of any subversive influence. But it's always been there. It was there with the Beatles. It was there with Elvis. It was even there with Sinatra, who was pre rock and roll. So I mean, I think it has a lot to do with people just being freaked out by things that in young people like, and motivate young people, draw their attention, and make them spend their money.
It's interesting how back in the 1980s, during the Satanic Panic era,
Mm-hmm.
there was such a prevalent cultural force talking about satanic influences in popular music.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, those things, like you mentioned, have persisted through the entire history of the availability of popular music. Really, the era of the 1940s onward, when you could actually buy records, and everybody had mass media and everything, and really exploding in the 80s. You had MTV, which brought visuals more readily into the medium than they had been accessible before. And with that came this satanic panic thing, because of a lot of the theatricality coming out of the 70s with people like Kiss, and how that sort of mushroomed up into that MTV music video era. Like, everyone was looking for visual attention
Mm-hmm.
on top of their radio play. So it's strange to me how so much of what the Satanic Panic focused on didn't really seem to manifest very much in the music that they were looking toward. I
No.
Compared to like the 70s. I mean, in the 70s, it was so funny, and we talked about Led Zeppelin, and like, if you went and saw The Song Remained the Same, which has its flaws as a weird mashup of music videos, concert footage, and everything. I like it as an experience. I think it has some charm to it. But I mean, you look through that, and it's all this great Celtic mysticism and druidic imagery and Lord of the Ringsy kind of stuff happening in it. And when you get into the 1980s, it's really more like you know downfall of Western civilization, fall of Western civilization, kind of like Rainbow Grill, kind of hair metal kind of people, and you have all these church people looking at it going, "Oh, it's satanic." It's not satanic. It's fucking hairspray. You know, it's like, I mean, I don't know, like, where do you, I didn't realize that my devotion to Satan, you know, can be bought at the mall. Like, like,
In Tipper Gore's mind, it could be.
you
It
know,
could be, yeah.
oh man.
It was just funny because I can remember being 10, 11, 12 years old at the time and watching the PMRC hearing and seeing Dee Snider from Twisted Sister, Frank Zappa, and John Denver all united on stage. And it was just really strange to me hearing them speak. And I'm like, why do these guys make a lot more sense to me than the politicians who are condemning them, or the woman who teaches my CCD class, my Catholicism class, that are telling me that this is all bad? These guys make a lot more sense. These guys seem a lot more intelligent. Add Gene Simmons and Ronnie James Dio onto that pile. Just very intelligent rock and roll singers who had a bit of black magic showmanship to what they did, but in their real life, these were upstanding, very kind, charitable people who, I mean, I turned out okay.
Well, you've been involved with the Dio charities and things in the past, and a lot of Dio's stuff. I mean, from what I know of him, I mean, obviously you know him a lot better. You know the mythology of him, his family, all that stuff. You know much better than I do. So, what I do know though is that he was just a good Catholic guy. I mean, he was, Italian American, kind of community. And you look at Holy Diver and stuff like that, and it's sort of this reimagining of like Jesus going to another planet and that sort of stuff. And it's really baffling to me what some Christians take from these artistic expressions of people who are inspired by their faith to create interesting interpretations of it.
Yeah. But there is a story though, and I heard this. I am friends with his ex-wife. Before Dio was in, and they were recording an album that was called Long Live Rock and Roll, and they were in a studio that was in a chateau in France. And they were having a lot, supposedly the chateau was haunted, and they were having a lot of trouble. They were recording a song called The Gates of Babylon. And one time the tape broke. One time they recorded it and rewound the tape and played it, and it had been erased somehow. There were just a lot of problems. So they decided that they were going to get a Ouija board and do a seance. And they contacted a spirit, Baal, who was a very well known in the spirit world. And the board apparently spelled out, "I am Baal, I am the bringer of chaos," or something to that effect. And according to Wendy, there were a lot of strange things that were happening, glasses getting thrown across the rooms for unexplained reasons, strange noises in the night. Now, one thing that I do know that she did bring up to me is that Ritchie Blackmore was known to be a big practical joker. So to this day, she doesn't know if some of those things were Ritchie playing a joke on Ronnie to scare the shit out of him, or if they were actually true. But one particular incident she told me about, though, she said she was carrying a box of plates, I believe it was, of like ceramic plates down a staircase, and she felt a push on her back, and she tumbled down the stairs and landed on the case of plates and broke them. And she turned back to look at Ronnie, thinking Ronnie had pushed her, and said, "Why would you do that? You know, you could have killed me." And Ronnie was like 15 feet behind her. There was no way that he could have done it. And so she was convinced that Baal did have something to do with it. And in the liner notes to Long Live Rock and Roll, where they thank everybody, and then at the very end it says, "And no thanks to Baal."
Thanks for checking it out, everybody. Phantom Astronaut. Check out Midnight Mystery School. Links in the description for other ways to support the channel. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, and I will see you out there.